So, anyways, I do erase a bunch of videos. This is why I upload everything to the ClearNet and YouTube in a public way. Do the same thing on Facebook. So here, essentially I'm going to do applied Dpai, which is essentially the modern method that they built an AI that essentially you can probably buy one for your police station or for your journalistic company of some sort. And that essentially it's meant to be an AI that follows this path, essentially. And so basically it's where, it involves doing things that journalism entails or so. And so with that comes data. I pretty much always employ in data, but then I'm going to do an applied example of this from some recent data that I've pulled in to give people an understanding of when they collect something and what to do with it, and how this is where in investigative journalism reactions can actually be a valuable piece of data for further investigation. So in my preliminary collection of data for meeting up with Benton County Court and Benton County sheriffs, and essentially the Benton County Commissioner's office, and then a few churches, the psych unit, the doctors, and some police stations. Essentially what that means is that in that initial interaction, instead of part of the data that I wanted was to see what types of reactions I would get from them. And so essentially the data itself is contact information, but mostly it's about the reactions. It's seeing the people in there. It's seeing what they're dressed like. It's seeing what shoes they have on. It's seeing what they look like. It's seeing how their hair is. All these things are part of what I go to a face-to-face on this stuff for these reasons. Because all that stuff means something in my investigation. These people, they start looking and dressing in a certain way, and that when people fall into that and when they have certain reactions, that is essentially what I'm looking for in a face-to-face way. So processing of the data. Essentially after that there's some categorizations that I've already have some way preliminary information and data and stuff that I use for classifications of information. And so essentially some people had some pretty straightforward interactions, but then shoes, the way their hair was, the way they looked, the overall kind of hook-upness look that they have, basically, that all plays a part in certain stuff. A lot of the times the way that they interact with you, essentially there's kind of a Mormon interaction way that person gets classified in basically potential for Mormon twilight. Now this is the preliminary stuff that I process the data in certain ways. So then analysis. Essentially in this context, understanding what types of emotional responses mean in certain ways. So a few emotional responses were lashing out at me for telling a church what it is I was investigating, and then another person at that church showing all visual signs of paranoia. That is where paranoia comes in two ways. One is to be an aggressive bully. The other one is to be fearful and timid. So that's the kind of stuff. Another one is overt professionalism is a form of paranoia. People that are extremely paranoid are usually very neurotically normal and very professional and paranoid of people. ever finding out about certain stuff. Basically, these types of things fall into what would be an analysis at the interaction itself and the reactions that they have. Another would be essentially people that essentially there was a corporation that I approached that basically had an internal questioning of me uh, about what I was investigating in a more extensive way. And that also gets an analysis of essentially what is, why are they asking questions. I went into the federal district court. Why was some other clerk like kind of grilling me for these or analysis? I attempt to find high probability hypotheses for that type of stuff. And that then this type of stuff like leads into certain theoretical ideas. Another thing is the lack of access at the hospital I went to. Essentially, I went to the hospital. Nobody knew who the communications person was. There was a lot of times, if a corporation just doesn't have any answer for you, there's an analysis in that also. It's like a lot of times the executive boards or the hospitals might be under a massive liability in some way, and that then they basically make it very difficult in like a red tape way to be getting any kind of contact or any type of communication back and forth. They like to build red tape against any type of stuff. That's a lot of times an indicator of being involved in something illegal. Sometimes it just is. So these are the analysis. That would be an example of the analysis of the reactions to getting communications contact information in a face-to-face way. See, most of these people that and organizations that are involved in the things that I'm talking about, they're so scripted and used to people using only the internet that they're not very trained at the face-to-face method. A lot of times that's where small mistakes will start to arise, and that is what leads into a high probability of where to start an investigation in an official way. And that part of this process of walking up to them and asking was to officially tell them that I was officially investigating instead of my research investigation. This is my development investigation. And so I've spent many years of my life on this, and I will not stop because, I've made some pretty decent data collections, and from that, I'm pretty sure that, well, to turn things into a hobby and not to watch TV very much, and then to be bored all the time, and then to be a super genius, all that stuff leads into, like, what do you do? And so that is where, essentially, I investigate a child trafficking round, but it has some more extensive, broad-based conspiracies that involve organizations, okay? And don't let that word conspiracy, like, that does not mean lies. That does not mean fake. When it involves multiple entities, that is what the term is in the FBI. That's what the term is in the FBI. And that, from all my research, essentially it operates as like a pedophile police mafia. And that in the onslaught of this deputy gang down in LA's with banditos and executioners, and then me seeing certain people with physical signs throughout my time interacting with the Benton County, I've seen all the same similar tattoos and stuff, and that then I've seen the same similar kind of people, and then I've seen the same similar kind of ideas that they operate in somewhat of a cop gang way. And so that is what essentially here's where you can apply this process in lots of ways to everything that you kind of do, anytime you get any new type of piece of data, you can instantly kind of just work through this process really fast. And then, then it kind of organizes your stuff. So it's like, say this week you meet up with a bunch of people that you might be suspected of being involved in something. Then do this stuff, and then attempt to envision where to start. And that in this case, the most emotional outburst is where I place that as pretty much the main place to start. And then essentially, based on certain parameters of interactions, then to essentially, it's to investigate the most emotional outburst, and then some high probability, like, well, it's like if I went into the Lourdes Counseling Center and then I went into the Richland Police Department, I would notice staffing similarities. So that is where I would start that. That's in close proximity to the church. And that is essentially where the center of that would be the CUP Church, the Lourdes Psych Unit, and the Richland Police Department. And then also essentially the Benton County, right? And so that is kind of where essentially that's where the main start of an investigation will be around. And it has to do with merely me asking and informing them of an investigation that I'm doing privately on the abuse of children and the problems of cop gangs and the connections between the two of those. And so that's how, like, that's like if you were gonna do something in a week, it's like in the journalists, this is like meant as like a demonstration for journalists, and that this is like where I'm gonna use my real stuff. But essentially, I've gotten so good at this type of stuff that it was like, right, I was looking for these reactions, okay? And so essentially, those people are all in the Tea Party. That is where, in this investigation, those people will have certain, like, public meta abilities for federal investigators, and that all those people will be in the Tea Party. They'll be in the Tea Party. They will be. And so that comes from my thousands of books like this. Or, I don't know, I probably got at least 100 to 200 of these books filled with information that pertains in less or more ways to this. So that would be the approach that I would do. And so, like, when all the people start using hookup site ideas in journalism to debunk people's information, that would be another reaction idea that I would attempt to categorize as a high probability player. See, when they start hacking and stuff, and when they act like they can, like, break laws all the time, those type of people on the deep webs and dark webs, when they start, all this stuff about, like, controlling people's brains, those people will be a part of that stuff. When they say that stuff's classified because some police force is doing an investigation, there's no such thing as that. Those people will be a part of that. These are all the preliminary researches that I've already done that pretty much make it very easy to pick out people, and that then a lot of them like to do, see, if they're not cops, a lot of them like to do that stuff with cops. So then they do like the Proud Boy movements and shit, and then they go around calling other people in Proud Boy movements and stuff, and that then a lot of times those people don't even spend any time. They just typecast people, and they just do a flashy brain idea, and then Then I manipulate people with that stuff. And then that pulls those people out as potentials for